This is the beta group project for a higher education and law class at Texas A&M University Commerce. Student welfare is an important issue in higher education as well as elementary and secondary education. The First Amendment guarantees rights for students and institutions. Case precedence gives colleges and universities guidelines for student welfare. Public education is controlled by federal and state legislation. The Equal Educational Opportunity Act prohibits the denial of equal educational opportunity by a state educational agency based on race, color, sex, or national origin due to deliberate segregation, failure to take affirmative steps to end deliberate segregation, or the failure to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by its students. This civil rights statute prohibits states from denying equal opportunity based on race, color, sex, or national origin. It ensures that educational agencies take appropriate action to overcome language barriers of students in its instructional programs. The No Child Left Behind Act redefines policies and practices for public education. This act affects all public school students because of the standards-based reforms. It also encourages instruction to prepare for high-stakes tests rather than instruction designed to support student learning. The No Child Left Behind Act was developed to ensure that all children, whatever their ability, social or economic background, race, or physical condition, be granted equal opportunities in education. In the United States, there is a high growth in students who are English language learners. The No Child Left Behind Act requires English language learners to take state assessments identical to native English-speaking students in 3rd and 8th grades. In Law v. Nichols, the Supreme Court ruled that school districts receiving federal funds must act to correct linguistic deficiencies to make instruction accessible for all students. Section 601 of the Civil Rights Act was cited to decide that the San Francisco Unified School District had denied non-English speaking Chinese students equal educational opportunities since they could not read or speak English proficiently. Soon after law, Congress enacted the Equal Educational Opportunity Act and the Bilingual Education Act. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act governs the provision of special education and services to students. The Act mandates a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment for all students with disabilities between the ages of 3 and 21. This free, appropriate public education may be received at home or with full-time nursing services. School officials must consider 4 factors in making least restrictive environment placements: the educational benefits of placing children with disabilities in regular classrooms, the non-academic benefits of such placements, the effect that the presence of students with disabilities would have on teachers and other children in a class, and the cost of inclusionary placements. Individualized education programs must be developed by schools and reviewed with parents. Section 504 and the Americans with Disabilities Act are anti-discrimination laws that protect the rights of employees and parents with disabilities as well as students. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was the first civil rights law that expressly guaranteed the rights of individuals with disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in the private sector. Inclusion refers to the practice whereby students with disabilities are enrolled in general education classes and receive any needed special education services in that setting. Full inclusion means that students receive all educational services in the general classroom. In a partial inclusion setting, the student's home base is the general classroom, but the student is removed to receive needed special education services. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act mandates that students with disabilities are educated in the least restrictive setting and that removal from general classrooms is done only when necessary. The court determined that inclusion is a right, not a privilege. Assistive technology is any device or item that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capacity of individuals with disabilities. Students with disabilities can use assistive technology to overcome any limitation so they can be participant in the programs, services, and activities in order to receive the same benefits as peers who are not disabled. An example of an assistive technology device common in higher education is a computer with voice recognition software. Assistive technology services enable students to select, use, and care for the appropriate devices. Higher education students enjoy a constitutional right to free speech. This right is not absolute. Therefore, the courts have permitted officials to impose reasonable time, manner, and place regulations on the speech of students and their organizations. Educators can limit student expressions that are defamatory, obscene, lewd, or vulgar. Schools protect students from statements of harassment. Student-initiated organizations must be treated equally regardless of the group's viewpoints. In Widmer v. Vincent, the court reasoned that because universities recognize numerous campus groups, they create an open forum whereby student groups expressing all sorts of views must be recognized by the institution. In general, courts agree that attendance at higher education institutions is a privilege, not a right. Therefore, students must comply with rules and regulations that are related to academics. Educators in public institutions have the right to determine student speech and curricular content and to require students to comply with the terms of academic assignments. At the beginning of the 20th century, college officials had extensive autonomy, which included the doctrine of in loco parentis, which literally means in place of the parent. This doctrine allowed college officials the ability to adopt rules just as parents might have. These rules were designed to direct the actions of the student body and were not limited to school hours or campus limitations. Over the course of the 20th century, the in loco parentis relationship between institutions and students has become limited. One factor that outdated this doctrine was when military veterans returned to school in the post-World War II years. The McKinney-Vento Act provides that students who find themselves in homeless situations not be excluded from school. The Act defines homeless children and youth as individuals who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. The Act mandates that homeless children have access to education and services they need to receive an opportunity to meet academic standards. The Act gives the federal government the authority to withhold grant funds for noncompliance. Institutions of higher education must seek accreditation from national governing organizations with universal graduation requirements. States also define graduation requirements through detailed regulations for state certifications and endorsements. States have centralized their governance of institutions through higher education boards, which help define graduation requirements. The Board of Trustees at a college or university has authority to direct the course of study to be pursued by the students and to vote on the institution's graduation requirements. Grades were designed to provide formative and summative feedback to students and their parents. Courts will most likely refer to educators' expert evaluation of students through grading practices. Most cases regarding grading practices involve alleged violation of due process in the form of liberty or property rights. A liberty interest in grades is found in the academic records of students, just as their liberty interests are recognized in their reputations, good names, honor, and ability to use their records for employment or further education. A property interest in grades would most likely be found in a claim for a denied diploma should a student feel that adverse and unlawful decision had been made to deny him or her that right. Dismissals from colleges and universities usually involve issues of due process, including whether students were owed due process before dismissal and whether institutional officials rather than courts decide the student should be dismissed. Mostly the court has held that the judgment of school officials determines the need for academic dismissal. Similar to grading practices, academic dismissals require expert evaluations from educators. In Regents of University of Michigan versus Ewing, a medical student claimed that he was deprived of a property interest without due process because he was not allowed to complete his degree when he failed an important written examination. The facts of the case reveal that the student failed 5 of 7 subjects on the examination. The court observed that because the dismissal was based on sound academic judgment of educators, there was no basis on which it could interfere with such an academic dismissal. Unlike academic dismissals, disciplinary dismissal cases require a due process hearing before dismissal. Common student behaviors responsible for disciplinary dismissals include cheating, participating in hazing, and taking part in events involving drugs and alcohol. The court holds that students have rights to procedural and substantive due process prior to suspensions and expulsions. Professional schools have the additional requirement that students are certified to be of good character. Students may be restricted from graduation or entrance into programs if they are unable to give evidence of their good character. Control of public education is the responsibility of the individual states. School officials have the right to use academic sanctions for poor academic performance. Examples of academic sanctions are academic probation, retention, expulsion, denial of course credit, changing in ranking, modifying honors, or failing. An academic sanction can be applied for unacceptable behavior in violation of student handbooks or behaviors related to cheating and plagiarism. One example of a non-academic reason for sanction is student absences and truancy. School officials maintain that students cannot perform academic tasks satisfactorily if they are absent excessively. Courts generally conclude that as long as school regulations are reasonable and serve legitimate educational purposes, and as long as students are notified of the rules in advance, the resulting sanctions are valid. School athletic programs typically have academic standards for participation on teams. Failure to meet these standards may result in sanctions. Most educational institutions are developing anti-harassment policies to protect students from violence delivered by fellow students. These issues affect all levels of education. Bullying can be defined as physical or psychological violence that targets students who are unable to defend themselves. There are 3 elements that mark all bullying. An imbalance of power is the first sign. This imbalance can be due to the bully's physical strength or mental superiority compared to the victim. An intent to harm is additional evidence of bullying. Also, a threat of further aggression or a sense of terror marks bullying. Cyberbullying is defined as the use of communication-based technologies to engage in deliberate harassment or intimidation of other students using online speech or expression. A recent study of bullying on college and university campuses revealed that more than 60% of students indicate they have observed a student bullying another student. Cyberbullying is becoming more popular in college because it makes it difficult to determine who is doing the bullying. Hazing practices are most prevalent in membership rituals for collegiate, fraternal organizations, and intercollegiate sports. Ohio's anti-hazing law defines hazing as doing any act or coercing another, including the victim, to do any act of initiation into any student or other organization that causes or creates a substantial risk of causing mental or physical harm to any person. Some hazing incidents result in fatalities. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the suicide rate of young people is rising. Recently, higher education administrators have become concerned about student suicides on campus. The best practice for institutions is to develop and enforce formal suicide prevention policies with specific guidelines for interventions and parental contacts. At this time, courts do not seem receptive to suits placing liability for student suicide on universities. In summary, we would like to make note that schools should take action to treat all students equally in all regards of education. All students should receive fair treatment regardless of their physical or mental conditions. Educational institutions should follow policies to give students due process. The rights of students should be protected, but students should also be reprimanded for their behavior when necessary. Schools should take precautions to protect all students from unwanted situations. Student rights and welfare covers many aspects of the educational system. There are so many reading materials about these issues. We have decided to use the Law Higher Education articles for our research. There are many cases that deal with student rights and welfare. These are the primary ones that we used for our presentation. Thanks for your attention to these serious educational concerns.